You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. It's brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa. Strong as a group, close as a partner. MTN everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Duraflux, where Duraflux goes, water flows. Star Assurance, that is your solid partner. Now we move on to the economy, but let me share one tweet with you. Bright Simmons says that had Manasseh not spent his own resources to expose this PPA mess, of course, like he mentioned, the Ghana Integrity Initiative and the Media Foundation for West Africa paid for the job. You know, now he's a freelance journalist. Right. So he said, had he not, exposed this PPA mess, putting his reputation on the line, no one would have done anything about it. Not the thousands of politically active persons and groups, and not the government agencies. It should be clear who gives a hoot about Ghana. So that's Bright Simmons tweeting on Manasseh's expose and the results. Dr. Theo Champon, thank you once more for joining us back.
Thank you.
Right. So, briefly tell us, what's the situation where you are? Because we understand that, you are likely to go into lockdown next week. Coronavirus.
Yes. We are battling with the second wave of the virus here in Europe. And in the UK specifically, the government is thinking about imposing some sort of national lockdown. At the moment, the lockdowns are being imposed at a local level. So in Ghana terms, this would be, for example, people in Accra or Kasua going into some periods of lockdown, whereas people in Tamale, for example, would have a bit more relaxed approach.
Right.
But the scientists are calling for some form of a short national lockdown for a period of like 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Asante, you know, in Ghana, we behave as if the thing is gone. It's completely disappeared. What do you think? What should we be doing?
Actually, I would say that I myself have fallen into that. All of a sudden, you let your guard down, and a lot of people think the virus doesn't exist. They actually will call you out for being overzealous. But I think that the president did mention the last time that we have to keep wearing the mask. I think that's the minimum. Washing your hands. Using the hand sanitizer, keeping social distance, because I've seen the numbers and they are taking up again.
No, but the politicians are not setting any good example.
Yes,
they talk, but they don't walk the talk. They are going around these days. They are trying to actually mass crowd to show that they have crowds, and the crowds
I really
are
worry,
no mask, no nothing.
Yeah,
they are
because
this
virus, the mutations that has happened. Anything can happen. So I think we shouldn't take it for granted. They should lead, as leaders, they should show by example. And the people would also follow.
And I was so happy when President Trump went to one of the states and the state insisted that he has to follow the protocols. So they were doing physical distancing for those who sit. And he was angry. And I was like, what's happening? The president cannot have his way.
Yes.
Okay. I pray the day we will have this in Ghana, where the president goes to exactly. The president goes to a place and the protocols are there. You follow it or you check out. So they actually told Trump that he has to call it off if he doesn't, respect the way they want to have it there. Now, Dr. Champon, you have once again. This is the area of comfort for you. And earlier we were having some backstage discussion, and Dr. Kojo Asante was appreciating how you are able to crack the numbers the way you do. And you wrote this article, The Big Public Debate, a historical analysis of Ghana's public debt and fiscal deficit from 2001 to 2020. But can we begin on this note? On the note that President Mahama has brought this debate up because he looks at the figures and says, if our debt to GDP is 78%, then we have a HIPC status. Then we are hearing everybody saying, oh no, he got it wrong. He cannot be saying so. So I decided to check what the history looks like. And I find that saying we're in a HIPC status, he's not the first to have said so. Long before, when he was in office, the opposition was using the same. And they kept saying we're in HIPC status, including President Akufo-Addo himself. So why can't he say that today?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting you raised that. Look, I don't hold any sway for any of the politicians. They've been playing this, what I call kukufu football, right? With the public debt statistics as far back as I can remember. So anytime one is in government and the other is in opposition, the issue of the public debt or the national debt and related metrics always become, one for discussion. So you can even go back to the Kufuor era and even go back, to President Rawlings, and you can find similar statements being made by one side or the other on the high level of debt and indebtedness in the economy. And yes, they may call it HIPC or they may call it HEMIC or call it whatever. But the reality has been that both parties actually actively use the public debt as one of the political campaigning tools or the messages. So I am not necessarily surprised by that outcome if one were to look at the historical antecedents. What I am concerned about, though, really is how we characterize it or call it. Ghana is not in HIPC or HIPC status. We did that and far went past that as far back as 2005. But the national debt and the reality on the ground is that we are currently a nation that has high debt, high interest payments, and low revenue mobilization. And this is actually further compounded by the ongoing COVID pandemic. And these issues are structural. So it doesn't necessarily start with one administration or the other, but you can go back in the history with some of the charts that I've provided, and you can see that since we ended the HIPC period, or right about 2006, 2007, the level of debt and indebtedness in the country has actually been growing astronomically, even far more than the revenues that we are mobilizing, and far bigger than the GDP growth rate. And to the extent that your level of debt growth year on year is bigger than that of the GDP. So let me give you context. The debt numbers are growing sometimes in double digits, and the GDP numbers are growing in single digits. And if that is not turned around or changed, we would always have a situation of high indebtedness, high interest payments, and then on the other side, low revenue mobilization. So the politicians, they would always capitalize on this to kind of further their campaign or cause, and both NPP and NDC do this. The reality is that when you actually crunch the numbers, NDC and NPP have actually added to the debt in similar amounts over the period of their tenure, with the exception of President Kufuor, who brought the debt levels down partly because of the HIPC relief and then the multilateral debt initiative in 2005. As far back as President John Atta Mills, Mahama, and then most recently President Akufo-Addo, the debt numbers have always increased, and they've all, on average, added around 32% to the national debt.
So are you able to directly say that it is wrong for anybody to say that on the basis of the debt to GDP ratio, we are in HIPC status?
No, HIPC is a program, and it's a program that one has to apply to enter, by the IMF.
I am talking about using HIPC as an expression, not using HIPC as a program for somebody to enter.
Yeah, but it carries a meaning, right?
Yeah, so using HIPC, using the meaning.
Yes, but I won't say that. I think the reality, or what I would say, is that we are in high debt, high interest, low revenue mobilization. You can coin whatever you want to associate with that. But if we say it's a HIPC economy, or we are in HIPC status, that carries a different set of contextual understanding of meaning. So I think we have to be very careful on how we classify that. Certainly, from my end, I would not say HIPC. The politicians can say whatever they want to, but the reality is that we have high debt, high indebtedness, and we are not collecting or mobilizing enough revenue. If you look at the numbers and you break it down, basically 26% of every cedi of expenditure, or 26 pesos, is actually going into debt servicing. And then you have about 28 cedis going into employee compensation. And I think there's another 12 that goes into the grants to other public entities. When you add all of that up, what you end up getting is that all your revenues that you're collecting in any particular fiscal year is just going into servicing these three budget items. And there's very little space to do any other thing. And so the political or the managers of the economy are then forced more or less to look for other sources of financing. And remember that before they get into power, they would have made all these sometimes grandiose promises that often are not even costed, right? So they get into power and then they realize that, we don't really have that the resources to execute the mandate. But you've already sown the idea in the minds of the citizens that, look, you will do this, you will do this, you will do that, but there's no revenue. So necessarily, they have to then look outside to fund that, which then means more borrowing and more indebtedness and more payments. And then on the revenue side of the equation, they actually, the effort to collect more revenue doesn't often translate into that. So you look at our tax to GDP ratios, for example, and for a very long time, we're still sitting around, 12 to 13% or so. And this is despite all the reforms that have taken place as far back as like the structural adjustments going to the early 1990s. And that is like the elephant in the room that we really have to deal with. So for the political class or the political elites, it then becomes a question of, is it easier to go and borrow to finance those promises that they have made in their manifestos when they now come into power? Or is it, one where they have to then push citizens to actually collect more revenues or pay more taxes? And given that it's always easier to go to the markets to borrow, they often prefer, that kind of route. But what that then means is that you keep on adding on to the national debt.
Right. So President Akufo-Addo, as candidate in 2016, said, quote, in March, he was addressing Ghanaians at the Physicians and Surgeons College in Accra. And he said, quote, this NDC government has borrowed some 37 billion in 7 years. Then he proceeds to say that Ghana is now at a high risk of debt distress. At a high risk of debt distress. Government increased the debt stock from 2008 to 99 billion currently. Has this situation changed in Ghana today?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that everybody has been adding on to the debt stock. There's a figure or a chart that your producers might put up on the table that shows you the evolution of the public debt from 2000 to 2019. But what you begin to see very clearly is that from about 2010, 2011 onwards, you see the graph begins to actually increase or move up very sharply, right? And this is even with like the rebasing of the economy taking place during those times. So at the moment, if you look at all the statistics, we are at risk of high distress. And it's not just Mahama saying it. A couple of other institutions, including the IMF and the World Bank, have been warning about this for a while now. And it was also similar circumstances that even led the then Mahama administration to even approach the IMF for the last extended credit facility program that we entered into. So the issue of debt distress and high indebtedness has been there for a very long time now. What is shocking for me really is how the politicians tend to or want to use it as a political campaigning tool. But when you look at the numbers and you look at the reality, both administrations have actually continued to add onto the debt, and that has been the history practically of public financial management or public debt management in the history of the Fourth Republic of the country.
Okay, so let's listen to the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, as he went to Parliament to present the, if you like, what is known as the budget in advance of appropriation, as they call it, in advance of appropriation, and then we will return. That's 2021 expenditure in advance of appropriation. Listen to the Finance Minister talking about the approval for government to spend 27.4 billion cedis in the first quarter after the elections, and the NDC's John Jinapor also attacking the circumstance to say that Ghana is broke.
The purposes of the 2021 expenditure in advance of appropriation, we projected the 2021 first quarter total revenue and grants of 13.3 billion, while total expenditures, including the clearance of arrears, is projected at 24 billion. The results in the projected fiscal deficit of 10.7 billion for the period. Mr. Speaker, to support the 2021 budget and liability management, we plan to source funding from the international capital markets. This will comprise the issuance of sovereign bonds of US $3 billion, with the option to increase it to 5 billion should market conditions prove favorable. Out of the amount to be raised, 1.5 billion will be used to support the 2021 budget and 3.5 billion for liability management. Mr. Speaker, we will require an amount of 27.4 billion to carry on the services of government until the expiration of 3 months from the beginning of the 2021 financial year. The total amount is to cover government operations such as compensation of employees, ex gratia awards, interest and amortization, transfer to statutory funds, critical programs and goods and services, and capex allocations of MDAs.
What the Finance Minister came to do today is to provide what you call a holding budget. This is not a full cycle budget like we've always done, because we are in an election year. And so in accordance with Article 180 and our standing orders, we needed to give some approval for the first 3 months. This is supposed to cover January, February, and March. And right when the Finance Minister came, we thought that that was an opportunity for the Finance Minister to present to us up-to-date information. That is what the Finance Minister is supposed to do, and not to tell us what happened in the year 2019. When he was presenting the 2020 budget, he had the opportunity to report 2019 figures. In addition to that, he had an opportunity to do the media review budget. The essence of the media review budget is to tell us information of full year 2019. He spent the day telling us issues about 2019. You and I are interested in current issues, because that is what will inform us. In 2016, when Honorable Setekwe came here, he requested for about 10 billion. Today, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta is requesting for 27 billion.
Out of that 27 billion, over 10 billion of that amount would be used to service debts. That is debt servicing. It tells you that this country is broke.
Country is broke. The politicians like that word, you know, and they always use it. Okay, so what do you say about what's going on?
Thompson, I think sometimes, you know, after you've gone through this experience, election after election, maybe citizens should try and wise up a little bit. You see, whether we are in HIPIC, we are in debt distress, as citizens, we are likely to be the ones at the receiving end of any impact, economic impact, on a daily basis for our ability to take care of our children, to access the hospitals, to have a livelihood, to have a job. Even sometimes when you have these foreign exchange, you know, volatility, a lot of people, the impact on their jobs and their businesses are huge. So we shouldn't follow politicians when they are playing around with these debt distress, or let's ask, what exactly does it mean? And this is it, it's basic. This is how our economy is structured. We are not raising enough revenues to be able to fund our development needs. And you've seen the manifesto, all kinds of lofty ideas which everybody knows cannot be funded, but they are there. So sometimes some politicians say it's aspirational. So we are not raising our debt, our revenue to GDP ratio is not good. We set the targets, we can't raise it. We are servicing, we already borrowed quite a lot, and we are using a lot of that money that we are raising by revenue to service those debts. If you put together all of that in terms of paying compensation, so we are paying compensation, we are using some of that money to service debt, we have to make these transfers to statutory, as for, you know, statutory funds. So I don't have a problem with that, because that goes back to our development. So that's not an issue. But even if you take that, you're almost about 70% of your expenditures gone. Once you deduct some goods and services, a little bit of capex, you do not have any room for even a pandemic. So coronavirus hits, and you have to, this is the, whoever becomes, it's a finance minister, this is your headache. Coronavirus hits, where are you going to look for money? You don't even have, you know, either you go and get your 3 months import cover so that you tackle it. But we I don't know if you take like a family account or a family's little budget, you say that this person is doing pa. You understand? Right. Pa movement. You know?
Forgive me. It's a serious matter.
Yes,
can't help.
But this is the reality of our economy. And as citizens, what we have to be interested in and try to ensure and insist, how can we manage these things prudently so that, you know, even if we have to go and borrow because of our circumstances, the money is utilized well. So the finance minister, for example, is looking for 3 billion and maybe the option to extend it to 5 billion. Out of that, 1.5 billion is going to be used for critical services, whatever it is. 3.5 billion is going to go to liability management, which is basically our debt servicing. So we are borrowing money to service what we have borrowed. So how do we eventually move out of this? Because it can't continue. At some point, you get stuck. The things you are relying on. So pandemic comes in. Our economy was driven a lot by oil receipts, right? If you look at some of the tables, the appendices attached to what was read, if you look at ABFA, this is the annual budget funding account, the oil receipts. The ABFA, we are relying on ABFA, which is about 137 million or so, to fund free SHS. to complement GOG's support. Now that will rely on how well we do on our oil. But we know that the oil prices are depressed because of the coronavirus. Maybe it will pick up. But look at what is going up in Europe. Look at what is going on in the Americas. There are so many shocks in the system that you cannot plan for everything. So you need emergency money. You need to have some way to maneuver, and our economy doesn't have that. So what I look at some of this, and the thing that always worries me is that I don't see a budget for waste and leakages. Where are the resources that we are putting in place to deal with what happened at PPA? To deal with, what the Auditor General brings out annually becomes an annual ritual. Because that is money that is leaking. You don't have money. The little that you have to use it to service your debt. And yet the ones that you get, we don't seem to have put in any mechanism to ensure that the little that we have really delivers for us, expand our GDP, as Theo was saying. If your GDP is growing, 1%, and your debt is growing 2%, mathematically it will not match every time you are struggling. So if we are making investments, we have to make sure that the investment deliver. If they deliver, we'll have more money to even, we don't need to go and take on more loans. But every time I see the budget, I don't see how much of an effort, because we have to even put an investment in stopping the leakages and the waste in the system. And there are many. So that's the thing that disappoints me, that we just are interested, we keep spending the money, but we don't realize that we also need to ensure that the money is efficiently used, and we are not just pouring it out and losing it and having to go and borrow more. This is a challenge for us. Nobody knows, how quickly we can bring down, but we need to bring it down. Because at some point it gets stuck.
Right.
For me.
And Theo, I'll ask you this question for a brief answer, and then when we return, I will need you to focus on something that I need to be able to juxtapose with the current circumstance that we are told. And Charles Nixon Yeboah reports on the 26th of October 2020, Country Risk Index. Ghana ranks first in West Central Africa. And it says Ghana's Country Risk Index of 53.9% placed it first, ahead of 4 top West and Central African countries, according to assessment by Fitch Solutions, research arm of the ratings agency Fitch. This means the country is the best place to invest in the ECOWAS and Central Africa region, since it has a lower risk element for political, economic, and operational. The country's high score of both political and operational risk index propelled it to the first position, ahead of Gabon, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and Cameroon. According to Fitch Solutions, a high score index means a lower risk in terms of investment climate. Then we have the numbers as to the various portions and how Ghana has done well. What does this mean in the midst of a debt to GDP of 78% thereabouts?
This is the area that I actually earn my bread and butter from, advising clients on investment and investment-related issues at a country level. So the statistics or the evidence shows that more broadly, Ghana has always remained a favorable investment destination in not just West Africa, but Africa at large, and that's on account of quite a number of the reforms that have been taking place over the period. So what that Fitch report Fitch report is showing is that we have kind of maintained that consistency. And even in the midst of the pandemic, you begin to see some FDI inflows beginning to trickle in. But we also, you have to correlate that with things like the Doing Business report and other indices to get a much more comprehensive picture of where the business environment really is. So overall, I think that, yes, we have done some good reforms, and that's what's manifesting in the numbers that we see on the country side. How that translates to the debt and the deficit and the budget for me really is that I've said this on your program before, that because of our haste to attract investment, we are actually giving far too many of these tax exemptions that are not rationalized, that are not connected to a bigger kind of industrial policy or strategy. And then basically what then happens is that we are then collecting less of the revenue. These companies come in, they do whatever they want to do, export outside, and sometimes the profits are not even repatriated into the country. So that is the dichotomy of the challenge that any government that comes in 2021 forward would have to address, right? That yes, you want to attract investments, yes, you want the economy to grow, but at the same time, you also want to improve your revenue side of the equation. And one of the means of doing that is to rationalize like the tax exemptions that we give all over the place to various sort of enterprises, including multinationals.
All right. Let me share some of the messages that have come in by way of tweets, and then we'll take a quick break. We'll return to continue and finish up the discussion. But when we return, I'd like Dr. Theo Champong to also weigh in on the NDC's major, discussion. Their accusation of the government's performance economically is in twofold. They say this government has borrowed too much, yet no evidence of capital expenditure. What does that mean, and what are the implications? Now, Fred Amesi says that people like Manasseh deserve police protection, not 275 MPs, some of whose voices we don't even hear on the floor of Parliament. Hashtag Newsfile. Maltiti tweets at Saida, says, I'm calling for action to bring this menace of corruption to an end. We must all support the resolve of the media in holding our leaders accountable. It means we must relook at boosting security in our country too. Hashtag Newsfile. Kofi Adabo says it is a very good step taken by the president for a very strong decision, as it is very close to a very important election. Okay, so what exactly are you saying? Hashtag Newsfile. Achim Krachi says, my worry is security in the country and party foot soldiers. Hashtag Newsfile. Then from Papi Ghana, it's Papi Ghana, says, it's true. There is a level playing ground for all Ghanaians when the NDC is in power. The security can testify that they can't work effectively under this government. Really? Akosia Boy says, this PPA news is a step in the right direction and seems like a tip of the iceberg. The public office is a place to serve the nation and not to enrich yourself, like Dr. Charles Frekubrobe had to say to open the Baredu memorial lecture, which was delivered by Manasseh. She says, kudos to Manasseh Azore, long live Ghana, and the fight against corruption. Hashtag Newsfile. Haruna Idrisu, BA, at Minority Leader, says, we are in high debt, way beyond that of 2015, which Dr. Baumia referred to as high indebted middle income country. Today, he can't even classify what we are currently in. Hashtag Newsfile. After Dazi returns to say, Shraj's thorough 188-page report shows that if politicians allow state institutions to work without interference, we'll get good results. But if this Shraj boss was appointed under Akufo-Addo. Could he have had the courage in an election year? Congrats to Shraj. Hashtag Newsfile. Elliot Forson Ampere says the difference between a developed country and underdeveloped country is one thing. Developed countries let their laws work, while underdeveloped countries trample upon their laws. Hashtag Newsfile. The very final one is from AB Mensa again. It says Manasseh needs police protection and not these corrupt politicians, but the government would rather provide personal security to MPs because an MP is murdered whilst neglecting the increasing murders and robbery in the country. Hashtag Newsfile. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.